everybody. We've got a few people that are still going to be making their way over, so thank you everybody for your patience. As I mentioned to a few of you, we did get a late start. Kathryn has agreed that she'll stay after to do any book sales and signing. So thank you for joining us for this evening's Monday evening exploration. I'm Cheryl Bronstein, the Director of Interpretation at the museum. And a couple of words of just general logistics. The bathrooms are right behind me here, and emergency exits, in the unlikely event that we need to use them, are right behind you or the door where you came in. I would like to start this evening's program by acknowledging that the Adirondack experience is situated on the Aboriginal territories of the Mohawk and Abenaki communities. Indigenous people continue to live in this region and practice their teachings and lifeways. I am so pleased to introduce this evening's speaker, Kathryn Bertine. With the Olympics in full swing, this past weekend's Ironman in Lake Placid, the Tour de France just ending a week ago, and the recent announcement of a women's tour beginning in 2022, tonight's program could not be better timed. This is certainly a time when a lot of energy is focused on sport, and a time when there is also a lot of energy on equity in sport. Kathryn is an author, activist, documentary filmmaker, and retired professional athlete. She has written 4 nonfiction books, including her latest book, Stand, which is available this evening. As a professional athlete, Kathryn has been a figure skater, triathlete, and cyclist. Her family has a camp in Old Forge, which I assume a lot of you already know. And then Kathryn herself is a 3rd-generation Adirondack landowner. After tonight's presentation, she will take some questions and then again be available for book signing and sales. So thank you very much, Kathryn.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Appreciate it. Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm going to start with this level of voice volume. How's that? Is that okay? Please raise a hand if you can't hear me, and we will adjust. So yes, thank you to the Adirondack experience and to this great museum, which I've been coming to since I was a kid. It's a joy to be here for 2 reasons off the top of my head. The first being that during this past year with COVID, of course, 0 interaction with anyone, no book signings, no speakings. So it gives me a lot of joy to be here for that. But the biggest joy is that the majority of Stand was written up here in the Adirondacks. And I'll share a little bit of this story with you too. As Cheryl mentioned, I'm very fortunate. I have had 3 books before Stand. There, Stand is standing this way. I had 3 books published by traditional publishers that were really big name publishing houses like Random House, ESPN, Little Brown. So when I had this book proposal ready for Stand, I brought it to my agent thinking, okay, I've been around the block. We're going to get a book deal for this. And my agent shopped it to all those big publishing companies, and they all turned it down. And they all had the same reason. And that reason was, we don't think a book about women who stand up and fight for change is going to sell. We pass. Oh boy, did that ignite the fire within. I remember thinking, maybe at first, okay, if 1 or 2 publishers, it doesn't fit with them, I get it. But to think that 25 publishers all said the same thing, nobody's going to read a book about this type of change. I had 2 choices. One was either I just scrapped the idea, forget it, I'm not going to write it at all. Or 2, okay, I'll found my own publishing company, and I will put it out there, and I will prove them wrong. And so that's what I did. I chose option 2, one of those companies that had originally said, it's not going to sell, don't bother, there's no room on the shelf. And that stuck with me. So I said, okay, then I'm going to make a company, and I called it New Shelf Press. So we built our own shelf, and the we is a very big part. It wasn't just me. It was hiring editors, graphic designers, a beautiful designer and person who made this cover. It was a team effort all around. But the big part about this taking place in the Adirondacks was that this time around the block, I didn't have a book advance, so I had to work many other part-time jobs, and I would have to write around that schedule. So Stand took me 3 years. This is, 2018 is when it started, and 2021 we released Stand in February, and hello. And so to know that the book has been out, and we have been proving those publishers wrong. People have answered the call, and they have actually said, wait a minute, this is the kind of content that we need out there. We need new shelves like this. So I am really pleased that some of those publishing houses are, now a little upset that they didn't take this chance. And the Adirondacks being this safe haven where I was able to write this book gives me so much joy to be here. So, and thank you for being here. There's also another Adirondack connection, which I'll get to as I tell you a little bit about the journey. But and I'll come back to this, but at a little picnic table in Old Forge, I pressed send on a certain button that launched a petition worldwide that went viral. And if that can happen in Old Forge, it goes to show that we can create change anywhere. So thank you for coming tonight. I would love to tell you a little bit about the journey of Stand, and then I'd like to show you a 5-minute trailer for the film Half the Road, and then I would really love to have a Q&A. My life is an open book, so you can ask me anything. It's a few open books, so I don't mind real, authentic dialogue. It's all out there. So this journey began, when I really wanted to create change. Let me start again. I never actually had this pivotal moment where it's I am going to create change for women. That, it didn't work that way. What happened was back in 2006 to 2008, I was hired by ESPN to answer the question, what does it really take to get to the Olympic Games? There's got to be an easy sport. I mean, come on, Want to see if you can figure this out. And ESPN said, so Kathryn, we want you to go figure it out. Try to get to the Olympics. And I said, well, in what sport? And just try to do something. Try to go to the games. It was this carte blanche assignment that for 2 years I was trying to get to the Olympics with exposing how very difficult it actually is to qualify for the Olympics. So, spoiler alert, I did not make it to the Olympics in 24 months. Can you imagine? But what happened along that journey is that I absolutely fell in love with road cycling. That was the sport that I focused on. I had been a triathlete, and before that I was a skater. That's this one, different story. But I was a triathlete, and I was good, but I wasn't Olympic good. But I was strongest on the bike. So when this assignment with ESPN came around, I was like, okay, I'm going to try cycling. Keep in mind, at the time, I was 31, and trying to get to the Olympics at that point, it was in less than a year by the time that got going. And when the assignment ended, I was so in love with cycling that I thought, wow, what if I could potentially take this to the professional level? What if I could race with these amazing, inspiring women that I'm aspiring to be like? That would be incredible. And I was so in. So I was like, okay, the ESPN assignment ended. I kept going on my own, only to learn some interesting things along the way that I did not encounter in triathlon or during my skating youth or the years I spent rowing in college, where everybody had access to those sports. And yet in cycling, I couldn't understand why at the professional level and even the age group levels, why are the women's distances cut in half? Why in the professional field do the women make a fraction of the prize purse than the men's side? And wait a minute, why aren't women even allowed at the same races that the men are? This sport is antiquated. This is old. Why is it like this? And so my journalism brain is going, why? Probably annoying many people along the way. But the big one that really hit home was when I'm trying to see if I can rise to the ranks and maybe gain a professional contract in cycling, only to learn that the UCI, which is the governing body of cycling, the UCI decrees that there is an age median for women's teams, and one may not average over the age of 28. And at that point, I was like 35. So, and then what didn't make sense too was, wait a minute, we have an Olympic gold medalist for the past 2 Olympics who is in her 30s and is thriving. What is this rule still even doing here? This makes no sense. And again, I couldn't find an answer to any of these questions. And then there was the big one too. Why aren't women at the Tour de France? That is the biggest bike race on the planet. And even if you're not a cyclist, 9.9 out of 10% people know that the Tour de France is a bike race in France. And so none of these things made any sense to me, and I couldn't get any answers. So I thought to myself, okay, you know what? Maybe if I can make it to the pro ranks, and maybe if I can get rehired at ESPN, if you guys remember 2009, not a good year if you were in freelance, not following the downturn in the market. So I was struggling along, doing all sorts of different part-time jobs. And sure enough, I was hired back to ESPN in 2011 for their new startup, ESPNW. But yet I hadn't earned that elusive pro contract in cycling. But I kept thinking, if I can get a pro contract and now I have a voice as a journalist, maybe the powers that be at ASO, which is the parent company of Tour de France, maybe ASO will listen to me. Maybe they'll hear that why we need to have women at the Tour de France. And I had tried reaching out to them on my own many times, pressing send on emails, only to hear crickets. They didn't care, nothing happened. So when in 2012, I actually landed a pro contract with Colavita Pro Cycling, which is a US-based team. I was 37 years old at that time, or about to turn 37, and so that was an anomaly in itself. But now I was thinking, okay, I've got a job with ESPN, I've got this, I'm going to try again. Crickets. ASO is not responding whatsoever. Okay, well, I'm with ESPN. Maybe what we need is a visual component. Maybe this is the perfect time. For any of you who might know ESPN, they started a documentary series called 30 for 30, and it was thriving. People were watching. Of course, there were barely any documentaries on women, but they had all the infrastructure, and I worked for them, so I pitched it to my boss, a woman, and I thought for sure she would get this. And I said, I have an idea. Now that I'm a pro cyclist, I have incredible access to all the women in the sport. They have amazing stories, incredible athletic ability. Let's put this on camera. And she said, and I quote, "Cover your ears, Kathryn. You're not going to want to hear this, but does anybody even watch women's cycling?" And I said, no, because there's no way for them to see it. But you're ESPN. We can change this. We can provide a platform where they can see women cycling. And the idea got squashed by my superior. And that really, I thought about this for a while, and it just flipped the switch. And I said, okay, if ESPN's not going to do this, I'm going to do this. And one day I actually said that out loud, which means I had to do it. And, and I was a writer. I'd never made a documentary film. I could potentially write a narrative for it, but nobody would ever want to put me behind the camera. I'd be like, oh, look at that, look at that. It'd be terrible. So I knew that I'd have to hire someone to make this happen, and also I'd have to figure out how to do this. I had never heard of the concept of crowdsourcing before, which is how you can fund a project. And somebody introduced me to that, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, you can make this happen. And I did get quite the education in this, and I took it out to the world thinking, I think ESPN is wrong. I think there are people out there that do want to see a film on women's cycling. I know these cycling fans, and they don't care if you're a man or a woman. They just want to see good racing, good athletes, great coverage, interesting stories. So I took it out to the universe, and the universe responded. We were able to crowdsource the entire amount to fund this documentary. And what was really interesting was the data. It was an even split of men and women who donated, and from 16 different countries. So I was like, take that, ESPN, we're going to make this happen. And that was a 2-year venture, a 2-year project from 2012 to 2014. We premiered Half the Road, which is a play on half the sky. Women hold up half the sky. Women also hold up half the road. And keep in mind, there's something else happening. I'm racing professionally during this time. 2012 is my first contract. Colavita signs me again for 2013. But it was very interesting because the new director that we had for 2013, also a woman, I thought for sure she would be so on board of this documentary. We've got tons of Colavita riders who are in the background or the foreground. And we were striving to really showcase women's equality. Surely she would be behind this. And I was, kind of called into her office one day, and she said, listen, Kathryn, we have to talk about this equality stuff. And I was like, yes, let's. And she said, yeah, I need you to stop talking about this equality stuff. It's going to drive sponsors away. Really, your job is to ride a bike and to smile and look like you're having a great time. And the more you talk about this, it's going to just drive sponsors away, and we can't risk this. If you keep talking about this equality stuff, you will not race this year. And then she added, who are you to talk about this stuff? You're not an Olympic champion. You're not a world champion. You are nothing. You're a no one. And those words really dug into my soul. And I'm also a very sensitive person. Like, I'm fine with standing up and fighting for change, but that stuff really, that affected me terribly. Not to mention that this director was somebody who I looked up to. She was no longer racing professionally, but when she did, she was one that I wanted to be like. So to hear those words were really devastating and soul-crushing. And for the rest of 2013, she did bench me. So that was hard on a professional level, on a personal level, even on a physical level. When someone tells you you're a nothing or a no one, you start to race like that too, and I would try to go to any race individually that the team wasn't at. I would try to do that, but it was a tough year. It was really tough, and it made me bring up that question, is the struggle worth the journey? I don't know. I didn't know the answer to that at that point. And fast forward, so here I am on this team. I'm not being raced. 2014, in the beginning of 2014, something pretty awesome happened. Half the Road came out. We had our world premiere in Tucson, where I live when I'm not up here. And it caught the eye of distributors. It caught the eye of the film festival circuit. We were able to enter 10 film festivals, 3 of which we won. And these were not cycling film festivals. These were like people film festivals, human film festivals, right? So that was mind-blowing for us. And something else that was really interesting that happened that year at the start of 2014 was that the woman at ESPN who was my higher-up was no longer there. And the director that, decided I was a nothing and a no one was also not renewed for her contract. So I like to think that who knows what was happening in the karmic universe, right? But I was a fan of what was happening, and everything was coming together. The film is out, and by the way, let me go back a step to tell you about the picnic table in the Adirondacks. During the time of making this film, I had, as I mentioned, access to the greatest cyclists in the world, right? The Michael Jordans and the Abby Wambachs of cycling. I had access to them, and we interviewed them. And there were 3 of these incredible women that, I always ask the question, do you want to race in the Tour de France someday? And they all said yes. And 3 of these women, after they said yes, I was like, wait a minute, I have an idea. If ASO is not listening to me, maybe maybe they will listen to the four of us if we band together. You know, these are the superstars. I'm just the space dust, but someone's got to drive this bus, and maybe that's what we can make happen together. I can be the bus driver. And so they all agreed, and we sat down and we decided we would organize, website, manifesto, why it makes sense for the women to be at the Tour de France, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's the financial lucrative thing to do, to include women. It would help ASO if they brought us along. By the way, if you're not a cyclist, I'm also not, or we weren't suggesting that women race men, but to have a women's field and a men's field, just like we do in every sport, right? But even that was beyond ASO's thinking, like, oh, that's too scary. So we banded together, we made this happen, and we decided we were going to launch a petition on change.org. And change.org back in 2012 was still on the newer side, and 2013. You had to put in some effort. You couldn't just like hit click. Yes, I agree, I support. You had to enter a lot of data to be part of this. So that was something, that I worried about. Maybe people won't invest in that capacity. But in the summer, July of 2013, I'm making edits on Half the Road, and the four of us, we called ourselves Le Tour Entier, which is French for the whole tour. We deserve to be part of this, the whole tour. And we launched this petition from this little picnic table in Old Forge, New York. And I went out for a bike ride thinking, oh, maybe we'll get like 100 people. That would be so great to sign this petition. And one thing that I had done before launching this petition was checking the box that said, when this petition is signed, the race director of the Tour de France will also receive an email. And I was like, oh yes, let's check that box. Maybe 100 people will sign this and we'll flood his inbox. This is exciting. So I went out for a bike ride and I came back, a couple hours later. And yeah, about 5,000 people had signed the petition. And that was on day one. By the end of the month, 100,000 people, just under, but I'm rounding up, 100,000 people had signed that petition across the world. And just like Half the Road, an equal split of men and women from around the world. And boy, ASO did not like that. They didn't like it one bit, right? So we had said, one of the things that we really wanted to have happen was a meeting. We wanted to sit down. When you stand on the front lines of activism, you can't just dump something in someone's lap and say, hey, make this happen, right? To be most proactive and productive, you have to have a plan to say, let us sit down with you and make this happen together. Here's a model, here's what we can do, and we had all of that in place so that we could just start with them if they would at least speak to us. And so July, August, and most of September, ASO just would wave this off. Luckily, at this point, the press was on our side, and the press was constantly asking ASO, have you responded yet? Have you set a date to meet? And finally, behind the scenes, ASO reached out and said, we would like to have a meeting with the four of you, but you can tell no one. This is a secret meeting. And we were like, well, 100,000 people kind of already know, that this is probably going to happen. But we had to keep it a secret. It was gag ordered. I remember one day on Twitter, I put out, interesting things are happening. And ASO said, take that down. Okay. So that's kind of where we were with them. They were watching all of our social media interactions, but we were onto something. And we did sit down with ASO in Paris secretly in October of 2013. And we gave the full presentation, and they said, okay, we're going to make something happen together. And so, but we were not acknowledged. Our group, Le Tour Entier, was not acknowledged because ASPO wanted it to be their idea. So we were, hidden figures. But behind the scenes, we were laughing because it's like, whatever, let's just get women to the Tour de France. And, maybe someday I'll write about it. And then you'll have all the details, right? So at that point, it was like, let's just make this happen. And in 2014, July 27th, which is tomorrow, 7 years ago, we created La Course by Tour de France, which took place on the Champs-Élysées. Champs-Élysées, right before the men's race rolled through, one day. But it was a very significant one day because we got our foot in the door. And ASO was like, we're only doing one day of the Tour de France because we need to prove that people are going to watch and see this and make this happen. And boy, did the world respond. 150 countries had access to this race on 50 different networks throughout the world. And the sponsors flocked to it, the fans flocked to it, everybody loved it. And I had been dropped from my team. I'd been dropped from Cola Vita with that director. And 6 months later, I had been dropped because I was a rabble-rouser. And 6 months later, a team in Europe signed me because I was a rabble-rouser. And I got to stand on the start lines of my dreams. And it was the most amazing, incredible thing that's ever happened. If anyone says, what's the most memorable thing you've ever done in sports? I'm like, oh, I know, and I share a bit of that story as being on the Champs-Élysées that day. So that's the fun part of this journey, that, we're all seriously, truly capable of making change happen. And, we don't have to be wealthy. We don't have to be Olympic medalists. We don't have to be Instagrammers or whatever that is. Like, we actually, can create something pretty special if we can find a way to band together with other like-minded individuals. So for me, that was awesome. And there's this side, I love telling this story because it sounds like magical. But what I haven't shared with you, which would probably take another 6 to 10 hours, is the backside. I do go into this in Stand, and I'm actually very happy to talk about this with you on tonight as well. But what was happening behind the scenes, my private life was falling apart as all of this wonderful public stuff was happening. So here I am in 2014, and the film is taking off. The Tour de France is happening. I have a third book scheduled to come out at that time. It seemed so amazing. Everything I'd always worked for and strived for was happening. And during that, my husband left in a very, very unexpected manner, and my world was crashing down privately. But how do you navigate that when, CNN and BBC and NPR are calling you for interviews about advancing women in sport and equity? So I had to put on this mask of and I was capable of talking about that side of it, and then as soon as the call would end, I'd be in a puddly pile of tears over here because I just couldn't figure life out. And it was awful. It was a really, really terrible stretch. And when it came to the point of is the struggle worth the journey? I was still trying to figure out the answer to that question. And yeah, when I say we, I think that's the voices in my head, but also those who are closest to me, friends and family that were there for me. And, that was my we. And they helped me get through some really, really dark times. But it got dark enough that I was that close to the edge of not wanting to be here anymore. And I had taken steps to make sure that that was the direction I was headed. And distraction intervened. And so I'm here today. And I think it's important that, we talk about these problems too, about what can happen to our mental health. Even if we seem like we've got it all together, like things are happening, to check in on our strongest friends when it seems like their world is perfect. I'm so thankful I'm on the other side of it. This is also why the book's about 400 pages. There's a lot in there, and I won't go into all the details, but I'm very much an open book about it. But once I got through that darkness, which took time, by the way, it took time. I lived for 2 years. During the process of divorce, I lived with my dad for 2 years in Tucson. He had just retired to Tucson, and I don't think he anticipated having his grown daughter move into his den for 2 years. And I am so thankful for that experience because I actually got to know my dad as a grown-up. as an adult. And he became my best friend. I lost my father last year, but he's here today. He's with me in spirit, and I feel his presence, and he is the one who helped me through the hardest time. I also have my brother and my mom here today, and that means the world to me as well. Thank you. And I consider you all now family, too, if you'll accept that invitation. It means the world to me that you've come out tonight. So what I'd love to do is I'd like to show you the trailer for the film, Half the Road. It's about 4 minutes. And then I'd love to open this up to Q&A. And I'm more than happy to sit here and talk the night away. What was I going to say? I'm going to show you the trailer now. Oh, yeah, so you can find Half the Road. It's on iTunes, Vimeo, and sometimes on Prime, depending on where you live. I don't know how Prime works. It's a fascinating beast. But it is out there. What's that? Yeah, okay, exactly, very true. So if you type in Half the Road, you'll find it. It's out there. Vimeo, that's my favorite. Vimeo's international, and it's like, it's easy. Okay, so here we go. I'll keep that pause there so you can read, because it kind of starts right in. All right.
Better man than me, women hold up half the world. So it behooves everyone to get off their butts and do something.
Women's professional cycling has been in full force since the 1970s, recognized as an Olympic sport in 1984. Still, the pro women continue to struggle for fairness and recognition in this male-dominated sport.
Big supporter of women's cycling, and the right sponsorship and the right pieces to go and build that up, and the TV package helps us space and understanding who the riders are.
99% of the women out there are just striving to make it.
I think it's quite funny when someone like Kathryn Bertine says, women's cycling has to progress to the level of the minimum wage. Well, why hasn't it? That's his job, to make sure it does.
We have a governing body of the sport of cycling saying that women are capable. These are not scientists, these are not psychologists, this is politics.
And I think the issue of equality is broader than just sports. When we're living in a democracy and you're equal, everybody's equal. Some people shouldn't be more equal than others.
What I love about cycling is the speed. It reminds me a lot of NASCAR and Ricky Bobby, and I just like to zoom in through people, and it's just fun.
For me, it's the most freeing activity I've ever partaken in.
I have to tell you, I don't give a shit if I get a prize money if I'm going to champion.
You make choices. I don't call them sacrifices because this is what I love to do.
This is what is normally supposed to happen when you're in your upper 20s. You just have a job, a child. I just threw that out the window.
We just love the sport that much that we know we're taking risks when we get on that bike.
Oh no!
Oh my God.
Disaster for Kristen Armstrong. She has fallen at the top turn.
What did you really think happened out there in the course of a day with a Peloton? Everybody stopped, put on makeup, or what? What did you really think?
Said I couldn't do it, but I did it anyway.
So I think that one of the most important things for us to do is to get out that word about women's inherent capability and start changing all sports. Well, it's going to happen anyway, but especially in cycling, where the women have a critical mass now and want to make it happen.
I hopefully broke down conceptions of what was possible for women to achieve. But I also believe we need more women's races run in tandem with the men's races, and I don't understand why that doesn't happen.
And women's sporting, women's cycling is popular. But why don't we have a Tour de France for women? Fantastic!
And that's my biggest dream, to race the Tour de France.
You know, if we hold up half the sky, where's our half of the road right now? This is where we need everything to come together and bring the next level up.
What do you think the most fun part about racing your bike would be?
They said I couldn't do it, but I did it anyway. They said I couldn't pass through it, but I passed through it anyway. Everything is safe.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. I will conclude by saying that the most amazing news happened this year. After 7 years of La Course by Tour de France being one day and our constant henpecking at ASO to uphold their promise, which was they were going to grow it incrementally, they failed that promise. But now, in 2022, they have finally revealed that there will be an 8-day Tour de France Féminine, or FEM, as they say, that will happen next July, starting immediately after the men's Tour de France. So it's good. It's exciting. It's not yet 21 days that the men have, but I think we're going to get there a lot quicker because the public is calling for it, the fans are calling for it, and the athletes want it. And even though it's taken us 8 years to get 8 days, we're going to keep going, and I'm going to keep pushing for change, and I know a lot of people are going to stand and do that with me. So now I can answer that question that yes, I'm on the flip side of the hard stuff, and the struggle was worth the journey. And being here tonight is such a joy that reminds me of that every day. So thank you. I'd love to hear any questions that you might have. Yes.
Are you still riding?
Am I still riding? For fun and fitness, yes. But
What's your favorite Adirondack route?
oh, what a great question. So I have to tell you, I have done the Lake Placid Ironman, and the bike loop of the Ironman through Lake Placid, Keene Valley, that, to me, that's magical. And I also love looping around South Shore Road, Old Forge Inlet, Eagle Bay. That gives me a lot of joy. So great question. And I see you're a cyclist as well, rocking the Liv, which is great. Liv is a fantastic company, a bike company that pours so much into gender equity. So thanks for sporting that tonight. I saw it, and yes?
I'm impressed with what you've accomplished, and we have to put this in context, and I'm surprised that those were not weapons. You know, we used to think that women couldn't run a full basketball court. They had to play 3 on each side. That was a women's team. They couldn't run a marathon.
Right. Right. You saw that. Kathryn Switzer, New York native, the one who ran the Boston Marathon, she helped change that.
Yeah. So good for you for...
Well, thank you. Thank you. You know, thank you. You're so kind. I appreciate that. I have to say that that answers a question a lot of people have, like, how does this happen? How does the ball get rolling? And I truly believe that change needs to come from within the system that's broken, right? So Kathryn changed marathon because she was a runner. Billie Jean King changed tennis while she was playing. I was a pro cyclist trying to get that change happening while I was racing. And you see what women's soccer is doing, right? The active participants. And I think that that's where the warning bells and the alarm bells have to go off is, you know, within the peloton, so to speak. Yeah.
One more thing, and that is that women still can't play 3 sets, best of 5.
In tennis? Exactly. Yes, it's crazy. And there's even in swimming, I don't think there's a 1500 for women. Is that right? Oh, did they make 1,500 for women?
First year, I was watching it this morning. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. There,
I have one question.
yeah.
What kind of coverage is it going to get? Because, like you said, we know that women have been racing, cycling. You know, I mean, I love cycling myself. I started a little late in life, but I love it. But you don't get to see the races. Like, where are they on television? So, what kind of coverage is the ladies' tour?
Great question. That's one of the main things that we're keeping the pressure on, is that you can't just have a women's Tour de France and then not provide coverage, because then they would be shooting themselves in the foot, you know. So back in the day when we only had TV as a source for coverage, you know, it was either on NBC or CBS Sports, but this is true of all sports. And so now what's happening with women's cycling and with all the live stream coverage that we have available on all these different internet platforms, you know, the bigger parent companies are taking notice of that, and they're paying attention to the data. What's the NBC one? Peacock Sports is now, you know, a platform where they're trying to show more of these Olympic-oriented sports. Often cycling falls under that, at least in the U.S. So what I'm...
Like
NBCSN, exactly. At the moment, it's almost subscription-based, but for the Tour de France, yeah. But that's what we're hoping, is that the more viewers that we have who tune in, that will actually change the infrastructure so that regular network TV will say, oh, look at this interest that's accumulating here. Let's put it on regular TV, because that'll open up their platforms for sponsorship and, you know, commercials, right? So knock on wood, it will happen. But the first year is all about getting the word out that it even exists. So I'm hoping that they will create the media package. But we are keeping tabs on that. And as soon as I know where it's going to be broadcast, oh, I'll share it. You'll know. Yes, we do have some men who stand up to advocate for the women in the sport, and we gently pressure for more of that to happen. You know, and I know that throughout my journey of activism, my greatest supporters were dads of daughters, the Dodas. They were awesome, and you know, they got it, and it was really cool. So. And of course, all the women too. You know, so I didn't mean to just single out the dads of daughters. I had great supporters that came to these projects. It was awesome, but the visibility is huge.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I think that the women's tour is going to be phenomenal. I think it's going to have a huge audience, because, I mean, I have friends right now that are going through withdrawal.
Of the tour?
And all those people are going to want to watch this tour. It's great.
That's how we feel. Once you're a fan of the sport, and especially in this day and age, the women really, truly are just as strong and powerful and exciting to watch, you know, that we see, right?
So I do have a question.
Okay.
What bike do you ride now?
What bike? Okay, so the last pro team that I was on a Cannondale Evo Super 6, and that bike fit me so well that I have kept that. I was on a Trek for a few years under a sponsorship, also great, but I am currently on that Cannondale that is now, oh gosh, it's 6 years old, but I love it. Oh, yeah, he just rolled his eyes a little bit. Okay, good, okay. I know, cycling's such a gear world that for me to say I have a 6-year-old bike is like, oh, that's old, but I'm glad you can understand. Do it. Do it. Do it. Sometimes I even have a mountain bike I'll break out up here. Yeah, from Ted at Pedals and Pedals. Yes?
I'm wondering if you involved yourself at the United Nations in some of the women's commission things, if you might find a very broad audience who would see sport as another vehicle for the advancement of women across the board.
That's a really great suggestion, and I would love to use a platform like that, because what we're talking about really isn't bike racing.
That's right.
And that's, that's very much a point that I try to drive home in Stand, is that this has nothing to do with cycling. It just has to do with equal opportunity. But if we can create that equal opportunity in all of these microcosms, then it's better for all of us, right? The rising tide lifts all boats adage. I love that one. So I would love, if you know anyone at UN, please connect me. Shanley.
Do you think that the size of the field will be the same for men and women?
Great question. So for those of you who might have paid attention to women's cycling in the Olympics, the women's qualification field was half the size of the men. It was 64 women, or was it 67? Okay, 64-ish, and the men had twice that. And that actually doesn't fall under the UCI, the Cycling Federation. That falls under IOC. And IOC is on this kick of everything will be equal by 2024. But I'm not sure how much they know about the inequities they currently have. So it needs to be fixed. It needs to be the same amount of men and women. When cycling was first in the Olympic Games for women, it was 1984. And the field was roughly around, it was like 40-some women, and we understood that that was the first Olympics, and maybe there were only that many pro cyclists in the universe. But now, at World Championships, it's close to 200, and I'm talking about 200 incredibly talented women that all have the ability to stand on that podium. There's still this idea at UCI and ASO and IOC that we're like riding around in petticoats, right? So they've failed to keep up with the progress. So knowing that in our pro races, I've raced in pelotons of 200 people. So to think that there are only 64 at the Olympics is backward. And then don't even get me started on the amount of political affiliations and which countries get spots and which don't, the qualification procedures. That's in there too. But it's, let's just say it's not equal. And it also skews toward countries that have, that are wealthier. You're not going to see second and third world countries that get the qualifying spots. And that's a sad thing because they have amazing, talented athletes that need to be at those games. Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about the support of the men in cycling. I'm lucky. There are a lot of women's cyclists where I live. There's a huge, strong women's cycling community. So the men I come across are pretty supportive of us women, and sometimes a little scared. But they don't really see us different. They push us the same. Actually, I ride with a friend who's cyclocross pro and races for Cola Vida. So,
awesome.
But, they just kind of like they'll leave me. They leave me. Let's go.
Right.
Catch up. Like you're no different. I mean, it's great, but has there been any pushback from men? And also, male, coaching women is different than coaching men.
Mm-hmm.
That is, we have different things going on. That is the truth. Is there, even in your experience with coaches, do they change that stuff and really embrace and think about the fact that, some of those things do have to change?
Great question. And the first part of that being that I've been very fortunate, the cycling community that we have in Tucson, it is a family. We call it the siblinghood, brothers and sisters. The guys have been amazing. They've been so supportive. And I'm a better cyclist because I've had to keep up with the guys, right? And I think they're a better cyclists for trying to stay away from me. So it works for both of us. It's great. But of course, yes, now and then you come across, there's always that one, right? But that's so rare. I think the struggle that I've had has been more with people who are in decision-making positions. So not the cyclists, but those dudes at ASO and UCI and IOC, right? They're not on bikes, they're behind the desks, and that's where the biggest struggle is. As for the coaching question, I love this. During my triathlon and then cycling career, I had 3 different coaches, and gosh, that was like a 20-year span from triathlon through cycling. Technically, I had 4. The last coach was a woman, but the first 3 coaches that I had were guys. They were great, they were professional, they were knowledgeable, very savvy. However, I don't think that there was enough data back then on women's physiology, on nutrition, menstrual cycles, all of that. I don't think those guys had any idea about that stuff because we didn't either as athletes. That was brand new data that was just rising to the surface. So I think that any athlete, any female athlete who gets involved in the sport now has such a wealth of knowledge at their disposal that I didn't have. And I'm talking like 10, 15, 20 years ago, you know, not eons ago, but just to think how much it's evolved since I've retired. I retired in 2017 from racing, and it's so much further ahead than then. So I think the best coaches are adapting to that. And they're like, oh, this is amazing. Have you seen Stacy Sims? You know, and they know all the people that are game changers in that department. So great question. Yes.
Let's take this one more this last question.
Okay.
On the grassroots level, so speaking of women's soccer, I have nieces who play college. They started as little bit fidgets, as I recall, running around. What has cycling been able to set up as that seed program?
Great question.
It's really the critical issue.
Oh, agreed. We need grassroots. We need change to happen at the top, and we need change to happen here so it can meet in the middle of the change sandwich, right? And the grassroots programs are so important. We are far behind Europe and other countries that prioritize cycling as a mainstream sport. But there is evidence of awesome change. In the mountain bike world, there's a program called NICA, which is, it's all about getting kids onto mountain bikes. And they have a high school and even elementary and middle school competitive system. So you can get your kids into mountain biking, and there's a pipeline of competition. And then on the road side, there are many communities that are doing what they can. I love giving the example of Tucson. And I think it's also wonderfully fortuitous that my brother happens to be wearing this t-shirt tonight of El Grupo Youth Cycling in Tucson that is doing that for kids. They can join from any high school or elementary. They have Grupito for the little kids. It's so great. And it's a place for them not only to learn how to be bike racers if they're competitive, but it also introduces them to bike packing if they're non-competitive and they want to get into using a bicycle to tour or go on cross-country trips. And that type of innovative thinking is awesome. So I can tell you that there's evidence of that happening, but we need to have more evidence, right? More programs like that out there for sure. But that's what I can share. I know that that's happening.
Thank you very much. And if anybody does have any questions, obviously Kathryn will stick around for a little while for the book signing.
I will happily sit here. Thank you for coming out today. You've made my day. Thank you. Thank you.
So we do have more programs this week. On Wednesday, we're continuing our Wednesday evening at the museum with a free night of bingo. And on Saturday, join us for our in-person gala this Saturday for an evening under the skies. And we'll have our silent auction as well. A week from tonight, our next Monday evening exploration is with the founder and the current CEO of Hudson Headwaters Health Network. We'll be discussing the Adirondacks and the future of rural healthcare. Please check adkx.org for information on any of these events, about the gala, and how to reserve tickets for any of our programs. And thank you very much to Kathryn.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Adirondack Experience. Thank you for coming.